Okay. My name is Marc Zorn. I am on the program committee for SMPTE, this conference, and I've been the security chair for the last 6 years, and I'm very happy to present today. Unfortunately, we had a last-minute change, so I get to do my own little kind of road show. One of the things that I regularly preach is that we have a growing conflict, a growing war, kind of a Cold War between regular information security, very corporate way of doing things, and then production security. And one of the things I tell people is, you have to do your homework. Security is tough.
At last entry. Did you send it?
Yes, sir.
A refueling schedule. Transmitted on security code B.
Sorry, sir.
How long you been with us, Ford?
Just over 2 years, sir.
2 years. Long enough to know how important security is to Shadow. Now look, this headquarters, controlling Moonbase, the satellites, and a fleet of submarines, is 80 feet below a film studio, right? Now, 400 people work up there, and not one of them knows all this exists. I have to play games, pretending to be the studio's chief executive. No one even dreams what my real function is. That's what security's all about.
I'm sorry, sir. Sometimes it's pretty difficult.
Difficult? So you think it's difficult, huh, Ford? Well, I'll tell you when it gets difficult. Have you ever thought about the victims of UFO incidents? Have you ever considered their parents, brothers, sisters? What do we tell them? They can never know the truth. So they live in agony for years, praying that someday their loved one may turn up, clinging to a thread of hope. Don't ever tell me that security's difficult. Sometimes it gets pretty close to home.
Sometimes the Zoom gets a little too close to home, too. I wanted a lighthearted opening to this, just to kind of set the tone for this. I don't want to get too embroiled in the technology. Obviously, the people here are already well embroiled in the technology, but we have kind of two different factions in the production process. We have the corporate folks on the studio side, and then we have the people that are actually making the different productions. Points if you know where this came from. Anybody know this clip? UFO, thank you. That was from the late 60s. So corporate infosec manages traditional computing very well. I mean, they actually have lots of training. The typical application for information security works well in most of the different industries, you know, healthcare, finance, construction, research, government, even telecommunications. And the people that work in information security, at least the people that we generally hire, are very well-trained people. They know what they're doing. The standard certification, or at least the one that's most widely recognized, is the CISSP. And here are all the different domains that they are expected to know very well. And it's very tempting to think that if they know all of these different areas very well, that it applies to pretty much any industry. Well, it doesn't apply one-to-one to every industry, and certainly not one that is so dynamic like ours. It's very tempting to think if you can help one company after a hack, you can secure the world. And we say, you know, hey, we'll create policies, and we'll set up governance, and we'll set up industry best practices and real information security, and then we'll audit the heck out of people. Well, it doesn't work that well. We've been trying to audit people. You know, nobody responds to an audit well. When was the last time you asked for an audit? It's not something that people usually are very proud of. Although I remember hearing people say, well, I survived a Marvel audit, or I survived an MPAA audit, and they use it as a badge of honor. But that doesn't necessarily mean that their security is good. They survived the audit. And one of the things that I've heard over and over again by the infosec people or the people at corporate is that, hey, data is data, and you know, we know how to manage data. So, you know, the content is just another form of data, right? Well, I want to, you know, send them out of the room when I hear people say things like that. Some of the things that traditional infosec assumes and relies on: enterprise networks, or at least networks that are well-formed, on-premises data centers, servers that are centrally configured, managed, patched. When was the last time you patched your server? Especially on a production in the middle of, you know, on location somewhere. Traditional infosec requires things like well-known applications that are tested, proven, vetted, databases, central storage, stable, homogeneous, and well-understood environments. One of the things that an organization tries to do is establish a security baseline, and then they you know, have centralized control and regular audits, and they figure out how to do it right. They love change control. They love ticketing systems and firewall rule requests. Well, it doesn't apply to a lot of what we do because our industry is moving constantly. The technology is always being updated. The networks are being created and then broken down at a moment's notice. The applications that we use are cutting edge. I mean, we have updates all the time. We rely on things like the new standards coming out from well, not coming out, but being agreed upon with SMPTE and that sort of thing. So when we talk about media and entertainment, we're not just talking about theatrical and maybe episodic TV. We're talking about in-camera studio, live theater, news, broadcasts, sports, esports, podcasts, all over the map. So when infosec people try and look at this stuff, they think, oh, well, we're just, you know, data is data, right? Well, tell me where here is just data. It's all changing. And there's usually a different culture that happens in every environment for each of these different types of media and entertainment. So why does the creative side of media and entertainment always struggle with security? Well, contrasting it with, you know, the standard infosec, we don't have static business models. Every production seems to be different. Every production has a different contract, different requirements. We don't have stable infrastructure. Well, in some cases we do. I mean, if you have a sitcom that's in the studio every week and they're you know, they can set up a persistent network and that sort of thing. But that's more the exception than the rule, at least in terms of our environment. So we don't have predictable production processes. I've been part of a number of different productions where even the role of, you know, various producers or various people that are on it, they kind of assume the title and then figure out what that title means with every production. I mean, I'm sure you guys have experienced that. We don't have long-term mature technologies. I mean, yes, we had a great run with film, and that lasted a very long time, but now that we're into the digital world, we were great with standard definition television, and then HD, and then 4K, and maybe someday we'll see 8K as a standard, maybe. And so things like regulatory compliance don't really apply, because how do you figure out what a baseline is? Because if it's changing from every production, how do you decide what's what? And I don't know about you, but we don't have exhaustive testing of a lot of what we implement before we actually implement it. We're not like corporate companies. We're less like product manufacturing and more like a band of gypsies. And my apologies to the Romani people. I just mean, we're always in motion. And if you think I'm kidding about this, how is this any different? We have a tendency to, we scope out a venue, we roll up the trucks, we unpack it, we work our magic, we pack it up, and then we're down the street. We're always in motion. We're more like gypsies. So when you think about it, we have dynamic environments, local networks, data and local storage systems that are locally supported. The technology, again, is often cutting edge. Data transfer, and luckily we have some standards that are popping out, that's a critical issue. And so we need to secure the data transfer because the data is always changing and it's always in motion. But the reason that I put the last bullet in bold is there's kind of this almost a credo or a motto that every production talks about. They don't want to put any security in place if it gets in the way. And it's not just about slowing down their workflow. They don't want to pay for it. They don't want to interrupt what they're doing. This idea, and why I put production speed in quotes here, does everybody know what I mean by production speed? Yes, no? Yeah, well, once a production is moving, once they're filming and or I should say shooting at this point, once they're in motion, once the trucks are rolling, once the cameras are rolling, they don't want to be interrupted at all. And so how do you you're going to show up with a suit and say, I'm here to audit you and expect them to, drop everything they're doing? Well, the cash register is going to be going ka-ching with every minute that you interrupt their process. So they don't want to talk to you. They won't even pick up the phone. And I know this firsthand. So let's talk about the divide of the different technologies. So typical infosec relies on standard networking and standard servers and patching and standard applications. Well, look at this slide. I'm sure you'll recognize most, or at least a lot of the logos here. I took this from the last NAB. These are most of the sponsors from NAB, and yeah, there are some areas like Dell and Intel and some things that are recognizable to the infosec people, but there are so many other things that they know nothing about. You are the experts of the technology, so we have to kind of take a different perspective and a different way of approaching it. It's not going to be some corporate guy who used to work in finance coming to a production and saying, this is the right way to do it. We have this growing conflict, as I started off saying, between companies that are used to doing telecom. We have Comcast that took over Universal, and AT&T that just bought Time Warner, and it's now Warner Media. We have new technology companies getting into the mix: Apple, Google, Amazon, and I would even consider Netflix to be more of a technology company than a studio. I mean, they started off delivering other people's content. Now they're really kind of getting into the business. So they're actually taking a more traditional approach. They think data is data, and we're going to be ahead of the game if we do it a little bit differently. And as I mentioned, they want to take a look at us while we have the least time to talk to them. They want to talk to us when we're running at production speed. If they want to find us in northern Britain and do an audit there, that's fine. Now we know, so instead of all of the different media and entertainment, these are kind of the major 5 phases of a movie or episodic TV. Most people are pretty familiar with at least the idea of these phases. And we have in terms of security, the last two are fairly well in hand. Distribution is when everything's pretty much already done and we're delivering it to the different avenues through over the top or theatrical or whatever. That's well in hand. We already have that. We've spent a lot of time in the last few years on post-production because we are farming a lot of this stuff out. So post-production is very much in hand also, at least in terms of knowing what the threats are. But earlier in the process, traditional infosec folks, they don't have a clue. Again, they want to talk to us where they think the biggest threat is, which is production, and that's the time that we don't have time to talk to them. So what I am proposing is that we start the conversation as early in the process as we can, while we're still in development, while we're still in pre-production, while we still have at least a couple of cycles that we can get people's attention. All pretty straightforward so far? So, what's the plan? Okay, points for anybody who knows what this is. The Italian job, good. I must be stuck in the 60s, I don't know. So for production management and crew, there are a whole bunch of things that we suggest that we do. So a new way of approaching it is to reach out when we're in development or pre-production. We want to think ahead. We want to start saying, hey, how do we classify all of the different assets that are on a production? The scripts, the call sheets, the props, the sets, the information about a production. And as what translates very well from traditional infosec is to take a philosophy of the minimum necessary access to all of the assets. If you think about it, we don't really need the crew on a production to have access to the data cart or the camera unless they're part of the camera crew, right? So we want to kind of keep the data separate, and nobody gets to touch the data unless they have a reason to. And kind of as a shout out to my friend Yona, think ahead to what metadata needs to be created and manage it properly from the beginning. Let's think ahead about the whole process instead of coming in later as infosec and trying to secure everything. Think about all of the different pieces of information. As part of the production crew, we want to control the information about your production, and that doesn't just mean the content or the image and sound data. That means everything about it: the scripts, the shooting locations, the call sheets, the identity of the cast members, budgets, props, costumes, everything about it. Control that information if you're associated with the production. Now, I realize that we're mostly technologists in this room, but we have all worked on a production at one time or another, so it's kind of important to get everybody thinking in the same way. One of the things that I try to I should have put this second to last bullet further up, but never post on social media or speak with the paparazzi or inform IMDb directly. If you have a production office, they go through all of the standard communications to tell the outside world what you're doing. But to that effect, always use a working title, even for low-risk productions. That way, when you do have a high-risk production, you already have this kind of culture in place. Always verify the identities and requirements of the people before granting access via email or systems. And we had a big problem with that in the last 2 years, where people would go to IMDb, they would find out where a production was filming, they would then find out who the crew members were, and they'd spoof email to them saying, hey, I'm your assistant director and I lost my script for the day and I don't have my call sheets. Can you put me on the distribution? Here's my personal email. And surprisingly, that works really well. So you get people that get all of this information about a production just simply by spoofing somebody. Also, establish monitoring, logging, and incident response procedures. Build it into your servers. Build it into the systems that you're putting in place. Brief everyone on the crew and cast about security. And this bullet is actually one of the most important, and I'm sorry I put it at the bottom, but honestly, if you're on a production, everybody needs to know that everybody involved with a production is involved with the production and involved with safeguarding the everything about it. Use only the studio-approved vendors for network and system support. Now, this is one of the problems that I encounter all the time, is that a production feels that they have total autonomy. They're out there, they're doing their stuff. Oops, they have a problem with somebody's laptop or somebody's server. And instead of calling the studio or calling the production IT support because they're embarrassed or because they don't feel they have time, they go to their local, Geek Squad at wherever, and they get support, and you have no idea what you're losing in the process. You don't know what content is going out the door. So make it a point to build a relationship with your support folks. And the second bullet is kind of my favorite. Find a trusted security professional that understands production workflows, technologies, politics, cultures, and use them for help. Find somebody that you know is good at what you do and also security, and get them to help. Don't assume that the people that are they've been in the business for a long time, but they're corporate infosec. They may not know very much about how production works. So find the people that do. And reach out to your infosec people and say, put me in touch with somebody who understands the workflows, understands all of this. And I want to also kind of put in my plug for the Trusted Partner Network. Please only use known and vetted post-production vendors. I've had a lot of problems with people using, Joe's cheap dailies processor, down the corner or whatever, where they find that they can have their dailies processed for really cheap, but they have no security. Nobody has any idea of all the things that are going on there. So don't cheap out. Go for the ones that are actually good, because you may save a couple $1,000s while you're doing your dailies, but you'll lose the rest of it because it got leaked because they don't have good security. Now that we're talking about some of the standards, please use encryption and key administration for all removable media. So if you're at the set, encrypt those hard drives, encrypt all removable media, encrypt the conversation that you're having when you're uploading your dailies or whatever. Install mobile device management software. Don't use crew-owned stuff. Just because they have a laptop and they know how to use it doesn't mean that they should be, using it. And obviously, standard common sense things, which are not very common, I found. Don't share your passwords, your PINs, your keys. Use multi-factor authentication where it's practical. We don't want people, having to use Okta or Google Authenticator just so that they can log into the camera. That's kind of dumb. So put some controls in place, but don't use multi-factor authentication because it's the most secure. Do it where it makes the most sense. So if you have it on the data card, that may make more sense. But don't do it on the camera if you don't have to. So be smart about it. If you're using the cloud, make sure it's properly configured for your production and to do collaboration properly. Now, on the other side of the equation, for corporate infosec, we don't want to just tell the productions how to do their job, obviously, because they really resent it. They don't really want to talk to us. Communicate. Okay, now I'm talking I have a vested interest, right? Now I'm talking from the corporate infosec side. Communicate to everybody involved in the process that you have a stake in the game. Thoroughly research production workflows, so look over the fence, figure out what they're doing, understand their technologies and their culture, so know when to call them before you engage them. So I know that corporate infosec likes to take a very firm hand and say, yeah, we know how to do security. This is the way to do it. So we're using ISO 27000 or ITIL or some standard frameworks, and of course it works in every industry. So we're going to apply it to you. Really, you're going to get shut down very quickly if you take that attitude. So you really understand who your clients are and how little they feel beholden to the studio. Because if they have to put up with strong security but not get paid for it, they'll go down the street where they will get paid for it. So don't piss them off. A key thing, productions won't spend a dime on security if if it comes out of their budget. The senior vice president of a company that I've recently worked for said, if my budget is, if I have to take a dime from in front of the lens for security, I'm not doing it. So, they have this idea that security is an afterthought. It's not part of what they do, it's something that's imposed on them. And that's kind of the culture that I want to change, is make it part of the culture. You don't buy a car without locks on it, right? But you don't really think about buying a car because it's got locks on it. Every car's got locks on it. So what we want to do is have every production have the proper security that's built into the workflow, that's built into the technologies that we use, that's built into the communications. So from the infosec side, fund security and supply the approved tools and technologies to productions. So if they don't want to put the security in front of, or they don't want to take the dime from in front of the lens, give them a better tool that's already secure, that's already been checked out. But you got to do your homework too. Production management and crew are highly skilled individuals that want to protect their work, but they don't have the luxury of time to do it. Now, one of the misnomers, or at least the misunderstandings of infosec is that, oh yeah, these production folks, they're wild and woolly. They don't want to do security because it slows them down. Well, they actually do want to do security. They have a vested interest in making sure that their work actually makes it to the audience. So yes, they do want to do security, but you can't slow them down when they're doing the bulk of what they need to do. So again, it's more about timing than it is about the breadth of what you're trying to get done. But to that end, policies, governance, or best practices, they don't matter once you're at production speed. They don't care. If you slow them down, they won't talk to you. Productions use cutting-edge technologies that you, as a security person, may not understand. So again, do your homework. And on the infosec side, partner with them to create security awareness and training that's tailored to productions. I recently worked with my counterparts at Warner Brothers to create a 5-minute and 58-second video, and that number is kind of important because if it's more than 6 minutes, we have to pay the union folks to watch it. Yeah, if it's 0.1, if they can put it on a time card at 0.1, then we have to pay them. So create a security awareness and training program that understands, that actually goes over a lot of what I've been talking about here. And one of the most important things, admit you won't get to everything and then prioritize it. And with that, do we have any questions? Really? Nothing? Okay. Oh, okay, good.
So you're talking about this, but what's the cost with regards to production? Would people put 1% into it? Can you get that right up front?
Well, that's hard because return on investment is hard to measure, of course. But I mean, that's why we come to these conferences, is to understand the tools and understand what is going to be used on a production, and insist that the vendors that are building the tools build into the security part. So I can't really give you a dollar figure, because what we're trying to do is just kind of build it into the culture rather than say, oh, we need X number of dollars, and if we spend X number of dollars on a production, we're going to get this level of return. I mean, security is just, it's a little bit more nebulous than that. How do you measure what is not stolen?
Right. You do have to be careful that you just can't dump it on the vendors.
Right. And actually, no, you can't dump it on the vendors. But one of the problems is that you can't expect the productions to adopt something that they have to spend a lot of time learning too. So it really is kind of an incremental and an iterative process to build up security, but it's all built on those relationships of trust between the people that are trying to impose the security and the people that are trying to crank out the stuff.
Fair enough. And of course, we all suffer with changing our Apple IDs 20 times a week.
Yeah, it's true.
I think that social aspect has made everything worse as well. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A couple of comments. First, please upload these slides so we can have them.
Yeah, at least the last few, the checklists, right?
And having worked in the production community 25 years ago, I'm still engaged with the folks I used to work with. I've been in the manufacturing side, so I still see it, but the production speed aspect, the Band of Gypsies analogy is perfect. Is that, oh, we need another gaffer. Oh, the AP knows ... So you get somebody pulled in that wasn't on the original crew sheet.
Right.
That's got to be considered.
Right, and that's why I say, brief everybody that's on a production, whether they're there from day one or whether they're a day worker. Take that 5 minutes and 58 seconds to tell them that they're not allowed to post on social media,
Yeah, but
even
they
if
do.
it's a little thing, but we have to build it into the culture. And like I said, it's got to be part of the tools, it's got to be part of the briefing, it's got to be part of just everything you're doing. Like I said, it's like buying a car with locks. It's just part of it. And you wouldn't buy a car that didn't have locks. So why do we have productions that don't have good security? It's just got to be part of it, and we got to bring up awareness. I'm trying to be an evangelist with regard to putting all of this stuff in place, but.
Hi, Shailin Mathur from Avid. You'd mentioned that the post-production side and the distribution side is well in hand for security. Can you just give us some patterns that you're implementing? What makes it easier right now on that side? Well,
it's not that it's easier. It's just that it's a little bit more well-defined. So the distribution process, it's something that we do with every production. It doesn't change that much from production to production. The post-production side is still changing, but it doesn't change as often. And since we're farming it out, we have to establish kind of rules of engagement with all the different players. So there's a lot of security that's already built into those kind of contracts that we put in place. And plus, the MPAA has been putting out best practices for a while. I actually helped to write some of them. So there's a lot of rules that are already in place. So it's not that it's well in hand from, it's well in hand as a mark in time, but it's not something you can just say, hey, we're good, we've got it done. It really has to also, grow with it.
Just one follow-up question. Are you finding that some of the conflicts from the infosec side versus the creative side, does that also exist on, say, the post-production environment as well?
It does. It does. I mean, basically everything until release is fair game. So we have to look at the whole process. It's just that the production part of it, we have to think ahead because we don't have the cycles to interrupt them in the middle. I mean, that's kind of, And unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm going to be around if anybody has any other questions that you'd like to ask me. And thank you very much for putting up with me and putting up with the 60s clips. So thank you.